We welcome you today to this service to honor the life of Sister Mazie Keeton. She was dearly loved and she'll be greatly missed. During the course of our service today, we are thankful to have Steve Shelton with us. He'll be sharing a message. We're thankful for Pat McWright and Meredith Hamner as they'll be singing a couple of songs for us. And Pat will come and be leading us in some singing just in a little while as well. So we'd invite you during the congregational portion of our singing to please join in. At this time, Alan Keeton is going to come and read a poem that was written by Jenny Boast, his daughter and Sister Mazie's granddaughter, entitled "She Loves Us." Brother Alan.
I'd like to welcome everyone and to say thank you from our family for you coming and sharing this time with us. It's times like these that make a person glad, so glad that they have brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and friends and brothers and sisters to share these things with. In Psalms 116 and verse 15, the psalmist said, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints." Before we get started, I'd like to share a poem with you written by my daughter Jenny about Mother. It's entitled, "She Loves Us." Our mother was a free spirit. And as much as a woman born in Alabama in 1930 could be, she was a free spirit. And I think that this poem captures her persona in so many ways, especially the first three lines. And I hadn't read this without crying yet, but I believe I can. So, she loves us. She has never met a stranger. No one can ever change her. And to this day, no one's dared to try. She's always on the go with Monk, Mabel, or Betty Jo. She hops in the car and waves goodbye, but we all know she'll be home soon and that she loves us. She can be hard to find, running away when she has the time, but we know there will be turkey and dressing, hugs and blessings, and candy on her Christmas tree. And some things will stick and stay, no matter where she is today. We know there are things that we can count on, and that she loves us. Her kids and grandchildren and their children understand that you cannot keep a wildflower in a bouquet in your hand. But she must run free to be happy. So we let her go so that she'll come home, and we know she'll bring friends and that she loves us. Married for 53 years to a man who looks down in love from above and can make her laugh until laughter turned to tears. And then she'd just get mad. But we knew that she loved him too. If you drop by, just have a seat. She'll fix you a 1,000-course meal to eat. And if we could find a way to get the people here, she could do away with world hunger in less than a year. Canasta and Phase 10, she plays with a grin. And win or lose, she'll skip you too. But we all know that she loves us.
Does Jesus care when my heart is pained too deeply for mirth and song? As the burdens press and the cares distress and the way grows weary and long. Oh yes, he cares, I know he cares. His heart is touched with my
We're part of the family that's been born again. Part of the family whose love knows no end. For Jesus has saved us and made us his own. Now we're part of the family that's on its way home. And sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we'll share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven, God's family. And though some go before us, we'll all meet again just inside the city. As we enter in, there'll be no more parting. With Jesus we'll be together forever in God's family. And sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven, God's family.
Didn't they do a good job? Everything within me wants to be sad. The longer I live, the more I'm realizing and understanding that people are people. I get all that. But folks of this age group are not replaceable. That's to take nothing away from other generations, because each of us in our own generation have our own qualities and our own traits that are going to be good and positive. But Tom Brokaw, in calling this generation the generation that Sister Mazie was in, when he coined the phrase the greatest generation, I don't believe he could have called it anything better. In observing people and of observing the older, the old, and even the young, I think we would all be remiss if we didn't say the greatest generation is the greatest generation for a reason. In not only what they did, but in the way that they did what they did. There are volumes yet to be written regarding that age. In this church at Atlas, we have at least 6 generations that are represented in the way that they've been discovered and described. And as I said, each generation has its own traits and qualities that that are good, and each one has its own for a reason. But I reiterate and say again that this generation is not replaceable. We don't think like they thought, and it's to our detriment. We don't do things like they did things, and it's to our detriment. We'll do things the best that we can, and we'll accomplish things the way that we can. But they're not called the greatest generation for nothing. As Meredith and Pat were singing the song that they just sang, God's Family, that was Dad's song. He really liked that song. He liked to sing it. The chorus, when it says, sometimes we laugh together. We spent about 3.5 hours last night mostly laughing. And we spent about 1.5 hours of that 3.5 hours eating. And we enjoyed some good food and some good conversation, right, Steve? And we enjoyed hearing the stories that they were sharing back and forth. And I learned some things at supper time last night. I'd never heard Aunt Mazie called a traipser. But I understand that, and please forgive me if I say it wrong, but my mama, thank you, coined that phrase because it was nothing for them to decide on Friday afternoon that they were going to load everybody in the car and go to Panama City or somewhere. And I've noticed even after her children obviously are grown and gone and have their own children and grandchildren, and I've noticed that she and Marion have kind of continued that process, that pretty often you'd see them in the car and you very seldom saw one without the other. So Marion, I guess you get to be called a traipser too. She doesn't want that term, yeah. Yeah. No, I call her Aunt Mazie as a term of endearment. When you're adopted, you get to adopt anybody you want. And I've got a lot of aunts that weren't blood relatives of my parents. And one Sunday night, Jamie remembered this morning, and I told her I was going to talk about it at the funeral, but one Sunday night, there were several folks that were asking for prayer for different things. One of the things I say here pretty often is, if somebody is desiring to become a Christian, then we have the capabilities of helping them do that. If somebody as a Christian maybe has stumbled and wants to come back home, then we have an opportunity to pray together. And then often if somebody has something on their heart or their mind that has nothing to do with sin, and I usually use that phrase, then we're willing and ready to pray with them and for them. And one Sunday night, Jamie and Mazie wound up sitting right here on this front row. Well, Jamie didn't know that I called her Aunt Mazie sometimes. She just knew I knew both of them and had spent some time with them and their family. And so I was talking about Aunt Mazie. And Jamie was saying, and I said, she said, grandmother. I said, no, she's your grandmother. She's my aunt. But we had a little fun smiling about that. And I think I know Mazie well enough to know that she really wouldn't want us to cry. But I think she'd be disappointed if we weren't sad that she was leaving. And that's my dilemma today. My dilemma today is I really don't want to cry because I feel certain I know where she is. Now listen, God is God and He's going to handle all that. But if somebody's leaving the Christian life, you and I can see that. In fact, Jesus said that in Matthew chapter 5. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So if what we did and the way we did it for people to see, if that didn't count, Jesus wouldn't have talked about it. And so I feel comfortable today and feeling confident about her eternal destination, but God is the judge and I'm not. And so for that part of it, I want to rejoice. And I want to be thankful, and that obviously should bring a smile to our face to know that she's fought a good fight, she's finished the course, and, now that and's an important word there. It's not just fighting the good fight, and it's not just finishing the course, because there are a lot of people in our world who die, who have fought a good fight in other areas, and they have finished their course as far as their life is concerned. But good people don't get to go to heaven because they're good. Paul says, I've fought a good fight, I've finished the course, and then he says, and I have what? Kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give to me in that day, and not to me only, but to all them that, he uses the phrase, love his appearing, or to all the others who have fought a good fight, who finished the course, and who have kept the faith. So everything in me today wants to be happy. But I'm torn because I can tell you just from my perspective, and that's nowhere near the same as your perspective, I'm going to be sad because I'm going to miss her. I'm going to miss her. I'm going to miss her as she took her seat over here, or as she sat back there on Wednesday mornings. And I'm going to miss seeing her, and I'm sorry, I don't want to make this harder on you, but I'm going to miss her circling up with her sisters. I'm going to miss her and watching her converse back and forth with David. I'm going to miss that. And so for every part of me that wants to be happy, there's a part of me that wants to be sad. And I know sometimes people feel guilty because they're crying at a Christian's funeral. No, it'd be a shame that you could live your whole life and nobody could shed a tear. We're not crying because we're worried about where she's going to live forever. We're crying because she's not here with us. And I love the poem that Alan read, and Alan, you did read it without crying. And I knew you could. And I appreciate that. But if you had, it would have been okay. It would have been okay. As we were gathered around the table last night down at Jim's place on the water, you could look out and see a lot of things going on and hear everybody talking and the different conversations that were going on and the things that were happening, the places that they went, the things that they did, all the things that were going on. And I believe it was Johnny who was seated over to my left. There was some quick wit going on, just some popping humor that was happening. And Johnny said, "You know where we all got this, don't you?" And it was from Mazie. And I can prove that point to you because last Sunday morning she took a pretty hard fall. and came home from the hospital, and we were all concerned, and in fact had made the statement, wondered why they didn't let her stay down there. And that's not our call to make, but nonetheless, sometimes we can think those things. But I went by to see her on Monday, and when I went in, I really didn't know how things were going to be. And when I got there, she was talking on the phone to Karen, and Johnny was on the phone in here. He was trying to get some business taken care of to take care of Sister Mazie. And in a minute, Cindy, and incidentally, Cindy, we appreciate everything you did in caring for her. You were a tremendous help, and I know the family appreciates that. I went to school with Cindy a long time ago and have fond memories of her. But I walked in to see Mazie, and I thought, I just don't know what's going to be today. And she happened to be facing the direction that I was walking in. If you're familiar with her place there, she was facing that way, and I walked over and just kind of trying to walk slow and quietly, and just trying to be a little extra careful. I said, Mazie, how are you feeling today? With my fingers. And we laughed and talked and had a great visit. And in fact, I would say an exceptional visit for the circumstances that she was in, and then we know how things changed in the next day. But I'm thankful today in the promises of the Bible that we don't have to hurt anymore. And the Bible says there's no more pain, there's no more sorrow, no more sickness. All that's gone away. And we can be thankful today that she has that blessing. Johnny, I want to say, and I could say something too and about everybody, but I want to tell you something that your folks have told me about you. And you and Kathy particularly and especially, that they really appreciate you providing a place for Mazie. And that was the Hilton as far as she was concerned. And some of your family today called me aside and said, I want you to say this. And they don't mind telling you themselves, but they wanted me to express it publicly to both of you. And their love and their appreciation for you providing a place, retiring and coming here to help take care of them. And that says so much. And they wanted me to tell you, and I'm honored to share those words today. Hey, Mazie loved God. She loved this church. She'd been here for a long time. Our homecoming day is coming up just in a few weeks, and we teased a little bit Monday about, hey, I'm going to save you a seat now for homecoming day. She said, oh, I sure hope I get to be there. And I firmly believe that she really meant that. I want to read the obituary and share this information with you and honor her and the folks that she loved and recognizing them and sharing the things that have been prepared for me to read today. Ola Mazie Flippo Keeton was born September 6, 1930. She passed from this life May the 2nd, 2017. Mrs. Keeton was a member of the Atlas Church of Christ for 45 years. She was preceded in death by her husband, Thomas Lee Keeton, and parents, Ola, Agnes, and Lyndall Edgar Flippo, by three brothers, C.L. Flippo, Lonnie Flippo, and Alton Flippo, and one sister, Martha Flippo McWright. Mazie is survived by her children, Karen Irwin, and her husband, Mac, by Tom Keeton and his wife, Tricia, by Alan Keeton and his wife Betty, by John Keeton and his wife Kathy, and by Jim Keeton and his wife Chris, by grandchildren Brian Irwin and his wife Amanda, by Julia Bracker and her husband Will, by Mark Keeton and his wife Amy, by Casey Keeton, Jason Keeton and his wife Kim, by Jenny Boast and her husband Brandon, by Angie Subczynski and her husband Tom. Did I say that right? Was I close? Okay, thank you. By Jamie Robertson and her husband Ben, by Josh Keeton and his wife Lauren, and Justin Keeton and his wife Chelsea. And then I like this next one, by numerous great grandchildren. Incidentally, how many are there? Does anybody know? A bunch. 15. Oh, wow. Congratulations. She is survived today by her siblings, Marion Ayers, by Hazel Mays and her husband Wayne, by Jenny Killen and her husband Selton, by David Flippo and his wife Bonnie, by Sylvia Flippo, Monk Flippo, Steve McWright, Tip Keeton, and Peggy Sweeney. And then there's some other statements here made regarding the flowers that don't pertain to this service. I'm so thankful today that Alan reminded us of what David wrote in Psalm 116. And I've said this before, and there's no use in not saying it today. That word precious is a real neat word. It's the most prized possession. If you've ever been in a crowd where your children maybe were not standing right beside you, you may see 100 children out there, but which one were you looking for? You were looking for yours. And when David wrote the word precious, that's what he was talking about when he was talking about God's people. He was looking for his precious people, precious in the sight of the Lord on the death of his saints. I loved Aunt Mazie. I'm going to miss her. I'm thankful that the Lord to this point has granted me a memory, and I'm going to cherish the memories that I have of her, and I'm honored today to have shared this time. Thank you.
Would you sing with me, please? There is beyond the azure blue a God concealed from human sight. He tinted skies with heavenly hue and framed the worlds with his great might. There is a God, he is alive. In him we live and we survive. Our God created man. He is our God, the great I am. There was a long, long time ago a God whose voice the prophets heard. He is the God that we should know, who speaks from his inspired word. There is a God, he is alive. In him we live and we survive. From dust our God created man. He is our God, the great I am. Secure his life from mortal mind, God holds the germ within his hand. Though men may search, they cannot find, for God alone does understand. There is a God, He is alive, in Him we live and we survive. From dust our God created man. He is our God, the great I am. Our God who hung upon a tree, a life was willing there to give, that He from sin might set man free, and evermore with Him could live. There is a God, He is alive, in Him we live and we survive. Because our God created man, He is our God, the great I am.
Thank you, Pat, Meredith. Good job they did singing. Alan. Let me say this before I begin. I'd been in the position that Miles has been in before, and I have, in the midst of personal tragedy, been called upon to minister to others who are going through tragedy. And, you know, today, Miles has in his own life personal tragedy, and I just wanted an opportunity to express my love to Miles and his love, and to hold up his love for this family and in doing what he's doing and in being here and speaking those words. I just felt like I ought to say that, and I know you know that, but I wanted to hear myself say it out loud. Mazie was the queen of the zingers, wasn't she? Those touche moments. And yes, she cursed you boys with it. But I love that. I love that. But you never wondered how she felt. She was clear. She told you. I can remember early on, first being here and going over to the house, and she gave us a jar of pickled squash. I can see that we made it later. We got the recipe and we made it, and we love it even today. But I can remember that it had that yellow squash, and what was the red? And it had red pepper, a pepper in it. It was a little bit sweet, a little bit hot. It was really good, and it was beautiful. I mean, the squash was small and cut up, and I remember her talking one day sometime later about how some of the squash had gotten big, and she said, "I'll pickle it and it'll go in my bums and thieves closet. And I'll give that to all the bums and thieves." And how many of y'all got those? So I got the pretty squash. And then I quit getting it, and I had to learn to make it myself. But I love Mazie because Mazie's real. She's just real. But I was thinking today about something I heard, and this week I've just been thinking about and kind of mulling over in my mind what I would say. And several weeks ago, I heard a missionary standing before us, and he had his PowerPoint, and he was talking about the place in which he worked. And one of the scenes was a hut. I mean, it was a hut. And a woman was sweeping, and you could see that she was sweeping out what a hard-packed dirt floor is. She was sweeping a hard-packed dirt floor. And he said these words. He said, "She is sweeping the dust off the ground." And that caught something, because see, I've heard those words before, dust of the ground. I heard them in the book of Genesis when Moses writes and he records that, "And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground." Now, never before had I seen it like this. Never before had that caught my attention that God formed man out of the dust of the ground. I mean, I had always pictured in my mind that, let me run a rabbit for a moment. My daughter, my oldest daughter, lives in Kentucky, and going up there driving one morning, it was cool, so we just had the vents running in the car, and we were driving by this beautiful piece of farmland, and the ground had been tilled, and the soil up there is just black. It was beautiful, and it had a smell about it, the smell of new turned ground, and it was coming in the car, and it was like, whew, this is great. That's what I always pictured God forming man out of, that just reaching down deep in the ground and getting that beautiful loam of soil and just forming man. But my mind started thinking when I heard that. And I thought about if I were on the sixth day of creation, and if I were God, and I'm not trying to be blasphemous at all, but if I were God and it were the sixth day of creation and I had created everything, I mean the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, the mountains, the trees, every animal that walked on the earth, every bird that flew in the air, every fish that swam in the sea, if I had done that and it was my crowning achievement and I was going to make that in which I was going to make in my very own image, what material would I use? I might mine deep in the earth and get the largest diamond ever imagined and form man out of a diamond. Or I might take that gold ore and form man out of gold. Or I might take iron, or I might look at the mightiest, most powerful tree and form man out of that tree. But God didn't do that. He formed man out of the dust off the top of the ground. And I asked myself, why? And the rest of the verse tells the story. And he breathed into him the breath of life. That wasn't just air. Because it says, and man became a living spirit. He inspired man. Man is God-breathed. If we come to a point in time like this, and what we would usually say at a graveside is from dust we come and to dust we shall return. Imagine if that story was, we used to be a diamond, and we get to be a diamond again. We'd lose the emphasis of what's really important, wouldn't we? We used to be gold, and we get to be gold again. No, we get to be dust again. Because this that was formed out of dust, this that was made out of what was laying on top of the ground, that's all it is. That's all we are. If it were not for the fact that God breathed into us that which never dies. And so when we approach a moment like this, when we're at a place like this, a time such as this, and we're thinking about, there's Mazie. No, that's not Mazie. That's the dust of the earth. You talked about Mazie being a traipser. What about Hebrews 11 and verse 13 beginning, when the Hebrew writer goes through all of those great hall of faith, all these great men and women, and then throws a few extra in at the very end. But he says this about them: these all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having embraced it and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims, sojourners. You want to know how we might translate that word sojourner? Traipser on the earth. Exactly. She was what we all ought to be. And we know we are. Because we're made out of the dust of the earth. God just gave us this body for a while, but it's never meant to be permanent. We are eternal creatures living in a temporary body. And I'm so thankful, because this old body was never meant to last forever. You know, we're sitting around the table last night and we're comparing our diabetes and knee problems and eyesight, and I think somebody said something about hearing, but I wasn't sure. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I remember when I used to could pick up the front end of a Volkswagen and move it around, and I remember when we used to talk about things other than, I'm happy to be able to talk about grandchildren, but all that other stuff, it's just a testament to the fact that we're made of the dust of the earth. The dust of the earth. Let me share two passages with you today. Just two that I think honor, by their very explanation, honor Mazie's life and glorify God. And they're passages that dwell on this fact that our existence here is temporary. And they kind of go, they go to that fact that in the last few days, especially of Mazie's life, I've heard several of you say that she said, I'm ready. I'm ready. Well, that's a statement of faith that there is some place to go. And you know what? She made that homecoming, didn't she? One that is of greater magnitude and importance than any meeting we might have here. But it's because she believed firmly what I'm about to read to you. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 50 beginning. Suffer with me as I read. It's God's word. It's worth reading, isn't it? Paul says, now I say this, brethren, that flesh and blood, the dust of the earth, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither doth corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruption must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and when this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through Jesus Christ our Lord. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Listen to this part. For as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. What's he saying? He's saying, realize that this life is temporary. And use this temporary life in a steadfast, immovable, always abounding way, so that when that time comes, you can say, I'm ready. I'm ready because I know there is a life beyond this life that this life was the reason for. There's a place beyond this place that I'm here in this place for that reason. That I'm just a sojourner. I'm just a traipser. And when I leave this home, this temporary, when I fold up this tent, as Paul says, I get to be in that house Jesus made, prepared for me. Listen to the words of Paul to the Thessalonian brethren. 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 13. But I would have you not to be ignorant, my brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up with them together in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so shall we ever be with the Lord. And then listen how he ends this statement. He says, wherefore, comfort one another with these words. There's comfort in those words. In the realization that we are here but for a moment to prepare ourselves for an eternity, to forever be with God. And so, the logical conclusion of a godly life is to end it and go home to be with Jesus. And as we look from the other side of that veil, through the eyes of faith, although saddened, although we'll miss her, we know Mazie went to go fulfill the purpose for which she lived. And just as Jesus said, I must be about my Father's business, and then said, it is finished, Mazie was steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. And when it was finished, that body of dust returns to the earth, and the soul to God who gave it. That's why we're here. And talking about that and thinking about that both honors her life and glorifies God. And it ought to, because we don't think about it enough. We only, you know how, have you said to somebody, I only see you at occasions like this? We only think about things like this oftentimes at occasions like this. And so don't let this moment pass without learning the lesson of this moment. And it ought to spur us to want to live more godly, to want to walk closer to Christ, so someday we can walk again on a street of gold with a woman who wasn't afraid to live for Jesus, to hold up the cross, so that when her hour approached, she knew there was a place for her to go, and she wanted to be there. Pray with me.